And we are back, ladies and gentlemen. We are ready for the first panel of the day, decarbonizing energy. I would like to invite all participants from the live streaming channels to address questions, which will be then passed to the moderator at the end of the panel. Please make sure that you name the speaker to whom you address the question. Without further ado, please let me introduce Mr. James Watson, the Secretary General of Eurogaz, who will moderate this panel. James, the virtual floor is yours.
You can all hear me well. It's a great pleasure to be here today and a great honor to take part in this very important event. And I'm very happy to be given the honor of moderating this particular panel where we'll be discussing decarbonizing energy, of course, across the European Union, but also within Romania. What are the tasks that need to be undertaken as we pursue the objective of having a net zero carbon society by 2050? It's only 28 years away, ladies and gentlemen, dear participants. There's not much time to achieve this great climate ambition, and so we'll have to accelerate all possible decarbonisation pathways. Well, the good news is we have a great array of experts for you in this first panel. We'll begin in a moment with a keynote speech from Tudor Constantinescu, who of course is the principal advisor to the Director General of DG ENER in the European Commission. I'm sure he's known to you all. He's very well known to us. He's a great expert on many things, but including among those things, hydrogen. And hydrogen has emerged in the last couple of years as a very important part of the overall energy transition and the tools that we will need. There's of course a question of how much a role hydrogen will play. So maybe Tudor will be able to inform us his views on that. After Tudor, we have a panel. We have indeed really excellent expertise that we will be able to offer to you this morning. We have the head of the leading renewable energy source in Europe, Giles Dixon, the representative of Wind Europe, that's the chief executive officer there. And indeed, he'll be able to explain to us how he sees wind growing and what challenges and barriers there may be that need to be overcome in the Fit for 55 package. Then we'll move on and we'll have Roxana Kalaminta, who's probably known to many of you as well, who's the Deputy Secretary General of Gas Infrastructure Europe, GIE, as we commonly call it here in Brussels. Indeed, I'm sure that Roxana will be focusing on what mechanisms there are to decarbonize gas and the role that decarbonized gases will be able to play in achieving the net zero situation that we're all aiming for by 2050. After Roxana, we'll have Christian Zinglerson, who's the director for the Agency for the Cooperation of Energy Regulators, ACER, as it's well known. And I'm sure that he'll be able to give us a view of how the regulators see the decarbonization of energy and what needs to be done. We know in the current situation that there is a lot of work for ACER to do, as the European Commission have asked ACER to investigate the operation of the gas markets, the wholesale electricity market, and the carbon price market. So Christian will be a very busy man and have a lot to tell us about how he sees the role of ACER in supporting the activities of delivering the energy transition whilst keeping energy affordable. After Christian, we will be delighted to have Andrei Safar, who is the country manager of CEZ, Romania. And he will be able to tell us exactly how he sees the energy transition going in Romania, how his company is adapting, and how he sees the role of companies such as his own in helping to achieve the objectives of net zero by 2050 in the European Union and of course in the Romanian context. And then finally, after Andre, we will have Susanna Karp, who is indeed a climate policy specialist and has worked with a number of NGOs and European institutions, and will be able to tell us a lot about how civil society and indeed the non-governmental organization sector is seeing the possibility to achieve carbon neutrality and climate neutrality by 2050. So, as I said, we have an absolutely super stellar panel, something we can all look forward to. We really are going to be touching on the issue of the day with decarbonizing energy. And I'd like to invite Tudor to come to take the floor and give his keynote speech to set the scene before the panel. Tudor, are you with us?
Yes, James, I am happy to
see you, Tudor. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. We're all looking forward to hearing what you have to say. So please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much to you. Thank you very much to the Romanian Energy Center for inviting me today. I'm really pleased to have the opportunity to address again you in this period, which is really a very special period for the energy sector. It is also a very important period for the economic recovery and for tackling challenges and trying to complete some of them, in particular in relation to the sanitary crisis, which we know unfortunately in Romania is hitting quite bad right now. But this being said, let's focus on what we have today and focus on the opportunities that the Green Deal and the package of legislation which we brought together this summer in support of the Green Deal and the future legislation will bring in, plus the other measures, will actually be indeed of support also to Romania, as it will be to all member states, with a view to achieve the long-term climate neutrality objective of the Green Deal. And this, by the way, this climate objective, announced initially by our President von der Leyen, we know now is shared by more and more countries. So Japan is also aiming to decarbonize by 2050. Even China by 2060. The US came very strong back to the agenda, and now we are just 2 weeks ahead of the COP26, which is expected to give a new impetus to the climate discussions. It is not only the climate discussion. We see now in this context how important it is to have security of supply. It is also very important to have prices which are affordable for the people and citizens, and to make the energy transition in a way which is really benefiting to the society and engaging everybody, engaging all consumers. Now, it is to a large extent also about the technological revolution, and we see how investments done in research over the years now start to pay off, and this is something important. This is something important also for Romania to rethink and to put more focus on in the future. You have seen that the strategies we have put in place, that we speak about the energy system integration, the hydrogen strategy with the targets for electrolysis capacities up to 40 gigawatts by 2030, or now the prices communications, they all look at short-term, medium-term, and long-term, and try really to come with such initiatives which to steer the investments in the spirit of the Green Deal, which Green Deal really came with the idea to have more ambitious targets for 2030, to put more focus on investments in the coming years, more capex, and to reduce later on the OPEX. So make the energy system overall more effective, and at the same time avoid stranded assets in the coming years, and avoid lock-in effects to solutions which will not bring us to the carbon objectives for 2050. So to realize these things, we came with a package, in addition to the communication I have mentioned, and you are aware from last year. Now we came with a legislative package, one of the most impressive legislative packages of the Commission in the field of energy, 13 legislative initiatives, plus a climate social fund. And this package of initiatives looks at all aspects. First of all, to the prices, the ETS, the expansion on one hand of the ETS, and the deepening of the other hand of the ambitions in the sectors already covered by ETS, but also the carbon border adjustment mechanism, to make sure that we create a level playing field and we avoid carbon leaking in Europe. We also look at the energy taxation directive and making it more green taxation against labor taxation. So because we want to create jobs in Europe, and this represents actually an opportunity as well. We look also now in the coming months at the state aid. On the other hand, in addition to tackling this aspect related to prices, so we looked at targets, we looked at the policy measures, in particular in the directives on energy efficiency and on renewables, because we want to decarbonize the entire energy system, and not only the electricity part, although by 2050 we expect the electricity part to represent about half compared to about 25% now of the total final energy consumption, but still another half will be biomass, it will be biogas, will be hydrogen, and this part needs to be decarbonized as well. That's why in the red we have a very strong focus on renewable fuels of non-biological origin, including hydrogen, and on targets for renewable hydrogen along the hydrogen strategy to develop demand and the market in industry 50%, and in transport 2.6%. Finally, we also have standards and rules, for example, for CO2 emissions for vehicles, and for establishing the infrastructure, being for electric cars, or for hydrogen fuel cell cars. So this kind of targets will also trigger decarbonization of transport, which it's otherwise difficult to decarbonize. The transition has to be also just, has to be economic, has to be competitive, and this was underlined both by our president and vice president several times. And for this, we have an opportunity at EU level, which is the combination of recovery and resilience funds with the multi-annual financial framework. So we speak about 1.8 trillion. So, and they will help to achieve the green deal objectives, and by investing for the green deal objectives also to achieve the economic crisis tackling and to be able to achieve economic recovery in the coming years. This is all very important, and Romania, it will be an important beneficiary of these funds, both recovery and resilience and structural funds, not to forget about them, because now we are also in the process of making also operational programs and partnership agreements. However, already the National Plan for Recovery and Resilience, we welcomed. It was developed to a very large extent, centered also on the addressing climate change. And 41% of the funds are allocated into this direction to boost renewables, to foster renovation of buildings, which is also very important, and energy efficiency, district heating, also to improve the transport infrastructure and sustainable mobility, and even to support the phasing of green taxation and green budgeting. So these are all ambitious plans, coupled also with ambitious plans related to the phasing out of coal, which in turn has to be compensated by renewables. So important investment in renewables, plus the mechanism under the just transition, which have to ensure that in the end we take good care of the population, of the vulnerable consumers, and nobody is really left behind in this journey if we want to be successful. Now, I would like to mention that also hydrogen, I have seen is tackled in these plans, and there are maybe even more opportunities, in particular in connection with renewables. And there is maybe an opportunity for Romania to really develop, like other countries in Europe, a strong ecosystem and value chain, linking the resources and renewable resources being onshore, being offshore, with the coastal areas, with the ports, with the fluvial potential of the Danube, in the context also of the regions in Europe and macro regions, and really develop projects, because this is the moment now essential to develop such projects which will ensure a sustainable and energy transition over the coming years, and putting the economy on the right track for 2030, but also for 2050. So there are now still a number of urgencies to be tackled, including, of course, which the energy prices and the health crisis. But this should not defer the investments which are required to generate real revenues in the economy, which in turn will help passing over all this crisis, which, by the way, many countries in Europe had to pass, and we have to face these challenges also at European level. But it's very important to pass over these challenges also through collective action and making best use of the opportunities we have at the level of Europe in terms of resources, in terms of infrastructure, in terms of knowledge, in terms of research capacities and possibilities to mobilize at level of each region in such a way, and each country to achieve the long-term objectives and to attract investments. And this attraction of investments, leveraging the public funding, which is impressive but is never sufficient, will make sure that we can, and Romania can as well, develop sustainable plans and implement these plans and implement these projects, because I think this is a time of really trying to make these things concrete and achieve results in project implementation. With this, I think that this conference comes at a crucial moment now to put the right focus on all schools. And I would like to thank you for the invitation to be with you here today once more, and wish you a successful conference. Mulțumesc.
Thank you very much, Judah. That was a very wide-ranging opening speech. It was really good to hear all the different views and the points you made about how we see the global development, and indeed, undoubtedly, we will expect many countries to rally to the banner of achieving carbon neutrality. As you said, some countries later than 2050, but the European Union, of course, trying to lead the way there. Also, very important, you mentioned about technology. And of course, we'll need technology to achieve our objectives. We have to make sure that we are investing in the right types of technology that will ultimately help us get all the way to carbon neutrality by 2050. For me, standout points as well, hydrogen strategy, the targets for hydrogen that are now present in the Renewable Energy Directive, of course, focusing on renewable hydrogen, though we expect to see maybe through gas legislation later on this year, some view for low carbon hydrogen. And indeed, the development of infrastructure, very important points, which I'm sure we'll hear more from Roxana. In any case, I think, Judo, very much welcome your input. I think one final element that I must mention is the just transition that you also touched upon, and this notion that we must make sure that communities must not be left behind. And I know with the Climate Social Fund, the European Commission is very keen to try and make sure that indeed we do have a just transition. And I think we all across the energy sector agree that that has to be very, very, very much to the fore. Tudor, thank you very much for that good opening intervention. I do believe we can now open the panel, and I believe that Giles Dixon, the Chief Executive Officer of Wind Europe, is now present with us. And Giles, I'll be very happy to offer you the floor. However, I think we are going to slight change. I see Christian Bouchoy in the corner of my eye. 1 second. Okay. Thank you very much. Mr. Bouchoy, are you ready to speak? We have a slight change in order, I think. Yes, Mr.
I will be very brief and sorry for not being
No nice to see you, Christian. And I just introduce you, Christian Bouchoy, who is indeed the chair of the Industry and Research and Energy Committee in the European Parliament. I'm sure he's known to all of you in Romania. Is a very important player within the European institutions. And it's our great pleasure to have you with us this morning, Christian. Please, thank you for joining, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the invitation, and I'm really happy to be here with you. And sorry for the slight delay. Yes, indeed, it is a very important issue, and not only in the context, of course, of the rise of the prices in energy, but also, of course, in the context of the Green Deal and the transformation that we have to make in our societies, in our economies, in our industries, in our energy systems, in our transport systems, in our agriculture, in order to reach the targets that we settled for 2030 and for 2050. Because the initial point was to mitigate climate change. It's clear that climate change is the most pressing challenge we are facing, but of course, in order to reach the 2030 climate target and the climate neutrality in 2050, this means undertaking an enormous challenge, which requires a far-reaching transformation of our societies and economies. We have the target for 2030, 55%. We have now the Fit for 55 package, which is the tool to reach the 55% emissions reduction in 2030. There is a big debate in European Parliament. The committee that I'm chairing, the Industry, Research and Energy Committee, is very much involved in the debates. It was a very ferocious and big battle between the committees and the political groups also for the competencies. ENVI committee will play a very important role, mainly on what is related to ETS, to the carbon border adjustment mechanism, and to other files. And of course, ITRE committee is the one responsible for the new targets for the renewables, for the revision of the Renewable Energy Directive, and for the Energy Efficiency Directive. Both of them very important, and both of them offering also important opportunities for Romania and for Romanian industry. But of course, we need to look to this package, and we need to look to the whole transition in a balanced way. This is what I try to advocate. This is what I say to my colleagues from ITRE committee, from other political groups. We need to use all opportunities, but we should remain competitive. We should not jeopardize the jobs. We should not jeopardize our energy security. And also we should continue to have affordable prices for consumers and for industry. And of course, this is now a big discussion. It is clear that is not the main reason for the increase of the prices, the Green Deal. There are other reasons. It's the perfect storm that was described with the rise of demand in Asia, in China mainly, with the reducing of the production in Europe, with the wind problems in some parts of Europe, with the game of Gazprom, which took advantage of a situation. But of course, also the signals that we sent with the Green Deal and Fit for 55 are also important. Also the rise of the prices in the CO2 emission trading scheme also is a part of the problem. And for this, we need to be better prepared in the future. We need to be balanced. We need to give the right signals, and we need to have as soon as possible the taxonomy for the gas and for the nuclear energy in order to balance issues. We need to ensure consistency across policies. We need to continue to streamline our climate ambitions, but with a feasible transition. You just mentioned the Just Transition Fund. We need to leave no region behind, no industrial sector behind, in order not to lose competitivity and not to jeopardize the position of our industry inside European Union and also in the international markets. I also try, and this is also the position of my political group and the position of my country, Romania, to leave a little bit behind the ideologies and the dogmas, because it's not about ideologies and dogmas in the first place. It's about the feasibility of the projects. It's about the low-income families, also the middle class homeowners. It's about jobs. It's about industries. And here we need to go to the feasible solutions and not to the ideal situations that maybe some colleagues with a lot of enthusiasm would like to have. For achieving our goals, of course, we need to increase electricity and electrification. Most of this should come from the clean, renewable and low carbon sources. This is also very clear. You mentioned hydrogen. Hydrogen will be instrumental, will be essential for our transition and for reaching our goals, because we cannot electrify everything, and hydrogen is extremely important. We have to build a genuine market. We have to build production capacities. We have to build storage capacities. We have to build transportation. And of course, yesterday evening, we had the second trilogue on TENI regulation, where the investments in the hydrogen transport will be also very much encouraged. Some of them could be the current gas pipelines, which should be, of course, refurbished, transformed in order to have also the hydrogen transported. And I also am advocated on having a real strategy for carbon capture and storage, or carbon capture and utilization and storage. This is also extremely important for some industries, and also it's important for the energy systems in European Union. If these technologies will become mature enough, then we could have a mix of energy very balanced, and which will also give us the possibility to have energy independence and also good prices for consumers and for industry. I will finish by saying that The energy transition comes with challenges on one hand. I just mentioned a few of the challenges, but on the other hand, we need also to see its benefits. We need, and this is very important for Romania, to capitalize on the opportunities, because what is proposed now, the new legal framework, the incentives that we are building at the European level will create significant investment opportunities, will help member states and Romania also restore our economies with also deepening the energy transition. We have the opportunity to create new jobs, to create new production capacities, to invest in clean technologies. At European level, investing in clean technologies will give us a competitive advantage at the international level. But for this also, we need to provide certainty to investors. And of course, we need to use all necessary and what we have as tools, financial tools, in order to use all these opportunities. ITRE committee is committed to achieve the ambitious targets on climate policies, but with a coherent industrial policy, with the just and inclusive transition, and without forgetting for any second that we need to maintain the security of energy supply, and we have to maintain affordable prices for European citizens. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Christian. It's very good to hear from you and hear your points of view as ever. It was a great pleasure to have you with us today, and I thank you for your points. Certainly you have, as Tudor did, mentioned a lot the need for just transition, and I think everybody, as I said, agrees with this approach. Also, we are very happy that you mentioned a lot on the need for both the electrification and the development of hydrogen to achieve our objectives. And I took one very important message. He said, feasibility is key, not idealism. And I think that's very important. Pragmatic approach will be necessary. Thank you, Mr. Bushoi. We wish you a very good rest of the day. And thank you for joining us this morning.
Thank you very much. And congratulations for the very important and good debate, and good luck.
Thank you. Well, I think we will continue now with our panel. It's been very good to have Christian join us, perhaps a little bit later than billed, but nevertheless, always good to hear from the European Parliament in tandem with the European Commission. Giles, I see you are ready. I was giving you a nice introduction before Mr. Bushoi arrived, so I won't repeat it, and I will give you the floor. Thank you, Giles.
Thank you very much indeed, James. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great pleasure to be talking to you today. Just a brief comment, if I may, on something that Christian Bushoi has just said. He was talking about the high energy prices, the high electricity prices, and he mentioned, among other factors, problems with wind. It's worth recalling what the European Commission have said, which is that 80% of the reason for the very high electricity prices today is the very high gas prices, and most of the rest is attributable to the high CO2 prices. Wind energy generation over July and August was in fact slightly up on where it was in July and August in 2020. There is always slightly less wind energy produced in the summer months than there is in the autumn, winter and spring months. That's just a fact of life, and it's something we've always lived with. But to attribute the current levels of high energy prices to quote problems with wind or issues with wind unquote is incorrect. A few comments about wind in Romania to begin with. So wind energy is 12% of all of the electricity consumed in Romania today. Romania has 3 gigawatts of wind energy capacity installed. Romania was very active on the installation of wind farms in the early part of the last decade. And for a long time, Romania, in fact, boasted Europe's largest onshore wind farm, Fontanele in Dobruja. There hasn't been any investment in new wind farms in Romania for around 5 years now. there's no form of public financial support for new investments today, nor is there yet a regulatory framework for the development of offshore wind in the Black Sea, for which there is significant potential. However, the government's National Energy and Climate Plan for 2030 does envisage expansion of wind energy capacity from 3 gigawatts to 5.3 gigawatts, and it was encouraging to see that the final version of Romania's National Recovery and Resilience Plan in fact included some new investment in the Transelectrica grid to support the necessary build out of the transmission network to support this expansion of wind energy. It is encouraging also that discussions are ongoing between the government and the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development about a possible new public financial support scheme, an auction scheme for the further build out of wind energy using the contract for difference model, which is now the standard model for supporting the expansion of wind energy and in many cases solar energy as well across Europe. Contracts for difference, CFDs, they are cheap for governments because governments get paid back as well as paying out. They get paid back when wholesale prices are high. So any government with a CFD scheme today is making quite a lot of money. The second great advantage of CFDs is that they provide revenue stability, or at least the perspective of stable revenues. So you can borrow money at cheap rates. You can borrow debt at cheap rates of interest to finance your investments, and that reduces the total societal cost of building new wind farms. We are concerned by some developments in Bucharest at the moment. Of course, there is the wider political situation, but we were particularly concerned by the amendments that were adopted, or at least were put forward by the Economics Committee of the Senate, amendments to the ordinance governing the trading of electricity. These amendments were proposed last week. They now need to go forward for a vote in the Senate, and then they will be debated in the lower house of the Romanian parliament. Two things in particular concern us with these amendments. First of all, the committee in the Senate has proposed cancelling green certificates for the first 200 megawatt hours of electricity consumed each month in order to reduce cost pressures on consumers from the high energy bills. Now, we absolutely support the aim of minimizing pressure on consumers. The European Commission, in the toolbox that it published last week, governing measures that governments can and should not be taking to support consumers, both household and industrial, in the current situation. The toolbox was very clear that yes, consumers can be supported, but they should not be supported through measures which are basically a retrospective and unplanned change on the revenues of those producing energy. Instead, consumers should be supported through other means, through general taxation, or through using the auction revenues from the EU emissions trading scheme. The second proposal that concerns us greatly from the Senate committee is a proposal for a new windfall tax on all power producers. A tax which would amount to 80% of the revenues over and above 450 lei per megawatt hour. So that's 90 euros per megawatt hour. So anything earned from wholesale electricity sales above that level should be taxed at the rate of 80%. And this tax should come into force next Monday and should remain in force until the end of March next year. That is the proposal. Now, there are 5 things that are wrong with this. First of all, as I've already said, the Commission toolbox last week does not sanction these sort of measures. Yes, they sanction reductions in tax on electricity bills, VAT reductions. They sanction the use of general taxation to support consumers. they support the use of auction revenues from the ETS, but they do not support this sort of measure. So this proposal goes against the grain of the Commission's toolbox published last week. Secondly, this goes against the grain of how markets should be functioning. The internal electricity market is based on marginal pricing, and the principle is that there is one single wholesale price that applies to all. And the idea is that the market should incentivize the production and consumption of cleaner sources of electricity. And if the wholesale price is rising because the gas prices are high, well, that's simply a function of the market as it was intended to help drive the energy transition. The third problem with this is the very bad signal that it sends to investors. Investors invest in new forms of electricity generation, whether they're renewable or nuclear, because they are told by governments how the electricity market is going to be working. If suddenly the government changes the rules of how the market works along the way, in a manner that had not been initially intended or communicated, then investors lose faith in that government and its regulatory regime, and they are significantly less inclined to invest again in power generation capacity in the country concerned. The fourth problem is that this new measure, a straight tax, 80% tax on all revenues above 450 lei a megawatt hour, it assumes that everybody is selling electricity into the spot market. That may not necessarily be the case. Romania now allows for long-term contracts to be signed in the electricity market at fixed prices. Now, what happens if an electricity producer has signed such a contract and is on a fixed price of, let us say, 50 euros a megawatt hour? Suddenly, you know, they are at risk of losing significant money as a result of this new tax. And the fifth and final reason why this measure doesn't work is look at what is happening in Spain. They tried a similar measure. In fact, they've brought it in. And there are many similarities between the proposal from the Senate committee and what the Spanish government has recently introduced. The consequence of the Spanish measure is that many existing wind farms have closed down. They are no longer operating, because if they operate, they are losing money because of the new charge that the government has imposed. Also, we have seen construction of new wind farms has been put on hold. Even a large company like Iberdrola, building lots of new wind farms in Spain, has ceased construction of those wind farms because of the Spanish government's measure and the uncertainty that it creates about future revenues. And we have seen also that prospective new investments in Spain have fallen significantly. Last week, the Spanish government ran an auction for new wind and solar, and for the first time ever in Spain, that auction was undersubscribed, and big players such as Iberdrola, Acciona, Endesa did not bid into that auction because they do not have faith in the current government and its regulatory regime. So these are the negative consequences of this sort of measure, these retrospective charges that the Senate committee is now proposing. We trust that common sense will bear in Bucharest when the rest of the Senate votes on this and when it is debated in the lower house. Thank you very much.
And thank you very much, Giles, as well. I wonder, actually, if I may just very quickly, we'll move on then to Roxana. Why do you think governments are moving on the windfall tax? As you rightly pointed out at the beginning, it's not that the price rise is attributable necessarily to electricity producers, namely wind in particular. And then secondly, do you see that there could be a role for the Energy Charter Treaty for companies who have experienced this sort of thing to question this under the Energy Charter Treaty, as has been used in the past, as I remember from solar? How do you see it? Why these taxes? It's perplexing for me. And then honestly, do you think that there's a risk that those governments could also be taken, under the Convention of the the Energy Charter Treaty?
Mm-hmm. Good questions, James. Fortunately, very few governments are taking these sort of measures. So Spain has Portugal had a brief think about whether they should copy that and very rapidly concluded they should not. And they have their electricity market is linked to Spain's, of course, and other countries have rejected it as well because they see it as inappropriate interference in the market and how the market is meant to be working. So why has Spain done it, and why are the members of the Economics Committee of the Romanian Senate tempted to do it? I guess there is an instinctive reaction. Oh, electricity prices have gone up. Yes, the gas-fired power plants, of course, have higher costs because gas prices have gone up. But the other guys, nuclear, wind, solar, they're not buying gas. So this looks like windfall profits. It looks like windfall profits. But then you have to scratch beneath the surface and consider, first of all, what sort of revenues are the other generators actually earning? Yeah, because as I've said, in Spain, many of them are on fixed contracts, long-term contracts with fixed prices, and they're not earning these additional amounts, and suddenly they have to pay taxes on revenue that they're not earning. Crazy. The second thing that you have to pause and consider is what impact does this then send to investors? What impact does it have on the future development of electricity generation in the rest of the power sector? And, you know, investors invest because they see a market framework that they think is stable and reliable, and suddenly governments come along and completely change the rules and they don't invest anymore.
Absolutely.
Which brings us neatly to your second question, the Energy Charter Treaty. Could it help? Well, it didn't give us a great deal of help with the retrospective changes to wind and solar support in Spain. James, as you mentioned, it would be nice to think that it might offer some help. We were reassured by the clarity of the Commission's toolbox next week and the messages that sent, the clear message that these sort of measures are inappropriate. And it was quite telling that, in fact, the Spanish government reacted quite badly to the Commission's toolbox, you know, rather like the misbehaving pupil at the back of the class who suddenly realized teachers spotted what they're doing and they've been called out. Thank you.
Quite. No, thank you for that, Giles. And indeed, as I say, great insights there. And I do tend to agree. It was a sort of knee-jerk reaction, I think, is the way that I describe it. It's a knee-jerk reaction. Say, okay, well, these people must be making money, so we'll tax them. But actually, that seems to be very short-sighted, as you said, skin deep. Thank you, and also for the Energy Charter Treaty point. I appreciated that as well, Giles. I think you can put hopes in it, but then, you know, we've seen those hopes dashed before. So, yeah, good. Thank you, Giles. We'll move on to Roxana. Roxana, as I said, Deputy Secretary General of Gas Infrastructure Europe. It is a great pleasure to see you, as ever. It's always delightful and insightful to hear from you. Please, over to you.
Thank you very much, James. Thank you, everyone. Bună dimineața tuturor. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Well, first of all, I would like to thank Mr. Bodea and the Romanian Energy Center team for another year with an excellent agenda for the Romanian Energy Day. It is as timely as never. So my name is Roxana Caliminte, and I am the Deputy Secretary General at Gas Infrastructure Europe. We are the European Association of the Gas Infrastructure Operators in Europe, including pipeline, underground gas storage, and LNG terminals. We represent 70 member companies from 27 European countries, including Romania. Now, gas is making the headlines these days, be it on the TV, at the radio, in the newspapers, and at the Energy Council meeting in Luxembourg as we speak. And no wonder, because gas is 30% of the energy we consume in Europe today. And right now, it is the energy source that people read most about and care most about, because they see the prices and they are actively thinking, why is it so expensive? Where is it coming from? How clean is it? Should we be consuming so much of it? It's consumers. Can they heat their homes? Will they make it to the end of the month? It's jobs and the economy. Can we give industry and transport the fuel they need? They want it to be cleaner. They want it to be cheaper. And that's our responsibility as an industry to help deliver that. Gas is central to affordable decarbonization. And the gas infrastructure that will carry and store these gases is ready to get the energy to people that helps them lead the safe, predictable, and affordable lifestyles they want to lead. Now, there are three things you need to know about the role of gas and gas infrastructure operators. The first thing you need to know is that the current energy bills are high because there is limited availability of gas in Europe. Our LNG terminals are waiting for LNG cargoes to come, but cargoes sail to Asia, where prices are the highest. Our underground gas storage levels have never been as low. All stored gases are already out in the market. So it is clear to me that natural gas still plays an important role in the European energy mix. And it will remain so in the near future. But in the same time, we must step up investments and permitting processes for renewable and low carbon gases in each European member state. The gas infrastructure is ready to do the job. We are moving towards an energy system that will be based mainly on renewables. Renewables are variable, so we will need lots of energy storage and flexibility. In particular, we will need long-term energy storage for those moments when there is not much wind and sun in the system. And underground gas storage is the only technology that can provide this long-term seasonal storage. Now, where will these renewable and low carbon gases come from? Will they all be made in Europe, or we will also be importing some of them? Imports of renewable and low carbon gases through the LNG terminals will be necessary to complement domestic renewable and low carbon gases production in a similar way to natural gas imports today. They will enhance security of supply through source and route diversification and secure access to global and competitive gases. The second thing you need to know is that the EU and global rules on taxonomy and sustainability reporting need to ensure a real level playing field for all existing fuels and technologies that can already decarbonize the economy. We must never forget that on the way to climate neutrality by 2050, EU member states have different starting points in this journey. That means that member states will follow different timelines, different pathways, and will use different energy sources depending on their resources and policy choices. Now, I fully empathize with what Tudor has said and Christy has said, that a successful climate neutrality will be the one that will leave no one behind. And in this perspective, the switch from coal to natural gas is a quick, available, and affordable way to decarbonize those sectors and regions that heavily rely on solid fossil fuels. So it is crucial that the upcoming delegated act includes not only criteria for the long-term role of renewable and low-carbon gases, but also the transitional role of natural gas. And the third thing you need to know is that the Fit for 55 package is the big deal. In the long term, renewable and low carbon molecules, including hydrogen, are the ideal partners for electrons and will deliver cost-effective services for those sectors that cannot be electrified. And for that, we need 4 things. Firstly, we are going to need a stable and predictable regulatory framework. Stability and predictability are good both for consumers and investors, as they need the certainty for renewable and low carbon gases production. And we need the certainty. But our members are already willing and committed to reinvest into our infrastructure, making it already ready for the EU energy transition. Secondly, consumers are at the heart of the society, and they need to know the energy they consume is clean. So gas infrastructure operators will keep on moving the gas across borders, but a robust system of guarantees of origins must enable the consumers to trace the origins of their clean energy. Thirdly, we are going to need to ensure that the full value chain is ready for hydrogen. And at the same time, we will need production capacity, transport, storage, distribution, and demand all lined up. And let's not forget that Europe can benefit from its industrial leadership in hydrogen in terms of companies, employment, competitiveness, and so on. And fourth, and the last point, we are going to need to ensure that the cost of hydrogen is coming down rapidly. The sector will need a policy nudge to get this initial scale required for costs to fall. And this nudge can take many different forms, but a key one will be to finance some bigger projects to start to get some scale and industrialization. And a consistent EU legislation will glue them together if it is done right. And we are ready to contribute to that. Thank you very much, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you very much, Roxana. Indeed, that was a very, very comprehensive overview of the role that gaseous and gaseous fuels are playing today, play tomorrow, and indeed in the long term to achieve our climate objectives. You did mention some interesting points, I think, just very quickly before we move on to the next speaker. You talked about the need for long-term energy storage. And I think it's just been realized by the European Commission in the toolbox they brought out last week. They want to have a view of what kind of storage there should be for gaseous fuels. Now, you in GIE, of course, you're also very heavily involved in storage. Do you believe there is a need to roll out further storage, sort of security of supply or for market stability, that storage should be increased in Europe to deal with potentially high prices or security of supply issues? How do you see it in GIE? Do you think the toolbox is going in the right way? Do you have suggestions for Ms. Simpson and Mr. Timmermans about how the storage should be addressed? Because they're thinking about this, as you know.
That's right. And thank you very much for the very good question, because we are at the right moment in time, in the history, I think, to define the right policies to capture the values of underground storages at the European level. And these are mainly 3 values: the market, the insurance, and the system values. And as we are now seeing the low storage filling levels and the high energy prices, we are more than pleased to see that the EU leaders have finally launched this dialogue within the European Council around a toolbox of measures to support the storage market. And for sure, this toolbox of measures need to be very much reflecting the national availability of storage, and they have to be fit for each need of each European country. But we must not forget that this is only a market framework that we need to get it done right now. And we are already in talks with the necessary partners. But what is even more important is that we need to start we have already started retrofitting and repurposing our existing storage sites, and we are developing new ones for hydrogen. And we are already developing numerous pilot projects. We are identifying emerging business models. Everything is new for us. We are developing together with our members regulatory principles. But one thing is clear, there is a need for a European-wide cooperation along the whole value chain, and you and Giles and everyone will be needed in defining these frameworks. And the clean hydrogen, the European Clean Hydrogen Alliance at the European level, it's actually a very good framework for that.
Yeah, indeed. No, thank you very much for that, Roxana, and thank you for the good clarifications there. I think that indeed we see that storage is something that we're certainly going to see a role for gaseous fuels for the future. In whatever shape or form the future energy system looks, it's very clear that we're going to need to have stored gaseous fuel to support in times where prices are high, or perhaps when production is low. So we will have to see how things develop. But it is good to see that the European Commission are including this as a very important element within their toolbox. Thank you very much, Roxana. I will come back to you. I think we have a few more questions in my mind about hydrogen. We will now move on indeed to Mr. Andrei Safar, who is the country manager and chairman of CEZ Romania, and indeed has been responsible for building some of the large wind farms that Giles has been talking about in Romania, as well as hydro facilities. And indeed, he's been the chair since 2018 of CEZ, and I'm sure Mr. Safar has lots to tell us on how he sees the energy transition in Romania and what it means for a company like CEZ. Andrei, over to you.
Hello, good morning. So I would like to bring the view of someone who is in the position of the investor, and someone who is, let's say, having the role of player, which is implementing the policy, and will be the one who will be really realizing this transition in Romania. So what we see is that really the energy market is going to go through significant change. I wouldn't be afraid even to say the revolution, because the energy sector is going to be no emissions. We are going to have distributed generation, and as well we will have a significant part of all networks will have to become digital, which is going to be another important thing. In order to make all of this distributed generation part of the sector, we will need to turn to digital network and manage everything in the real time. And it will really bring the customer in the center of energy sector, because customer will become active member in comparison to what is it now, where consumer is the one who is really consuming. So in future, consumer will generate the power, will supply the power, will consume the power. For the successful transformation for each country, I see really very key thing is to have clear policies of each country, which are supporting very clear strategies and priorities of each country, which are done in the way that they are motivational for the investors to really invest and be motivated to invest. Because it's important to say that this Fit for 55 and decarbonization plan is valid for all the Europe. So all the European countries will be needing a lot of investments, and in some respect it will be as well about making it very attractive for the investors to come to respective country and make the investments in each country. What will be as well very important, it's going to be networks to be prepared for this change. So it will mean from the perspective of having the available capacity. So when it comes to either transmission networks, or it means the distribution networks, to be able to accumulate and absorb the new capacities, especially from renewables, and as well to be able to absorb all of this distributed power. And it will really require a lot of systems being implemented to be able to really run this system and run the energy flow in the real time. Which is something very different compared to what we are facing now. we will as well have to, and every country will have to make a clear decision how to ensure the balancing solutions, because that's something where with the more renewables, more distributed generation, we are going to be facing more and more of imbalances, and we will have to find a way how to cover it and how to cover it in the economical way. And the last thing will be to really define the proper financing support for this transition. And that's this. When I'm talking about this financing support, it should be as well addressing all of these priorities I said before. So it should be really targeting development of the policies. It should be targeting the development of the distribution or transmission networks. It will have to be directing the investments in the balancing sector to be able to balance it. And it will have to as well address investment in the new generation, but investment in the generation which is like the new technology. So something like when, what was it, like 10 or 15 years ago, when the renewables were in the position of they were not really economical based on the market principles. So there was a lot of supporting scheme across the Europe, making those projects, making those investments in renewables economical. So now it will be the period where majority of those renewable projects, they are economical based on standard market principles. So now it will be more about deciding what are the next generation of technologies which needs to be supported. What it means for us, because we are having in Romania, we are having distribution company, we have a supply company, and we have generation from renewables, among which is our largest onshore wind farm in Europe. And for us, what we see as a priorities is to be really active player and to be next to authorities in defining the policies and defining the directions and the rules for the future development, and be the one who is able to and who is explaining what is potentially motivating for the investors to really invest and make those priorities turn them into real life. We have distribution network. So for us, the main challenge is to really make the network ready for new renewables and make it ready for the prosumers. Here I would like to highlight that I'm really proud that we are the one who attracted and who connected half of all the prosumers in Romania in the first half of the year. We are one of the 8 distribution companies. And as well for us, it's very important to make it in economical way for the customers. So that's something which is very important for us to attract as well the external financing, to attract as many European funds or other funds for the investments in the network in order to make it really economically feasible for the customers to have this distribution network prepared. And when it comes to renewables, it's we are looking for potentially other renewables, and we are looking on the ways how to make those new renewables feasible. So when it comes to connection to the grid, when it comes to balancing costs, because this is one of the issue in Romania, and as well we are looking at how to make these renewable projects attractive for the financial institutions. So how to make them bankable, how to make as well the other financing sources being part of the energy sector. For our customers, and that's something which is very important, is to make their journey towards this active participation in the energy sector. So to make it smooth, to make it easy for them, and make it as well for them economical. So this is the role of our supply company, but as well that's very important for our distribution company. So to be the one who is able to provide them all the necessary informations, to make it for them very, very easy from the administrative perspective, to make it very understandable, and have the available capacity. And the last thing which we have as a priority, and this is to have our employees prepare for it, because this transformation, it's not challenging only for the customers, but it's as well challenging for us. So it's really important for us to have our employees prepared for the change and as well because we are talking about long-term perspective, so we are looking for targets for 2050. It's about attracting the current students, current young people to be our future employees, to be part of the energy sector and be prepared for this transformation and have the right skill set for this transformation. Thank you.
Thank you very much as well, Andre. Thank you for those good points. I think you made some interesting points about the need for clear policies. You need clear policies to drive the transition. And in this regard, do you feel that the Fit for 55 at the European level is giving the clear policies that you need? And I will link this to a point you mentioned. You're a big distribution company, which we know. One of your umbrella organizations, Eurelectric, is talking about the need for 400 billion euros investment by 2030 to support the uptake of electric vehicles and heat pumps. Do you believe that the Fit for 55 is going to give you the kind of financial support that you need to actually achieve that objective in the coming 10 years? Andre, back to you. I don't know if it's possible, if we've lost Andre. Possibly. Let me just check. Okay, I think we can't get back to Andre. Andre, can you hear me?
Yes, yeah, I can. I could hear you. Yeah, I can hear you.
Please. I don't know if you heard the question. If you want me to repeat it.
No, this is fine. So I think this is very clear that really one of the key success is really transformation of the distribution and transmission networks, because really the topology of the network is built for very different way of consuming and using the energy, and all of these things like e-mobility and so on. It's bringing, let's say, a lot of. We need to bring a lot of power to the places where this consumption was never in place, and so it's important to have the direction, and then based on this direction to be defining the financing scheme, supporting scheme in order to make it fast and make it economically feasible for the customers. It's really important.
Indeed it is, and I think we have to be consumer-minded and think about the customers and how they're going to cope with the transition, because a lot is going to be asked of them in the next 25 years or so as we move forward in that direction. I think that in principle, what you're saying, Andre, we can understand. I think it's very interesting to hear it from the sort of the perspective of your operations within Romania. I guess that as well, it's as I was saying, do you see the role of the taxonomy? If you're familiar with the taxonomy, sustainable financing, will that also support the ability to deliver those particular types of products that we need? Will that help bring those to consumers, to help consumers cope with the transition, do you think?
No, I think like all of these things together, but they should be put in the proper balance, and it should really work in the motivational way. But like every piece which is contributing and it's properly balanced is definitely important. It's in the help of transition.
Yeah, indeed. Thank you very much, Andre. Thank you for the answers to my questions. I always like to have the prerogative as chair just to ask a couple. We have had some questions from the audience. I will remind the audience, please feel free to send more questions in. We're very happy to put them to the members of the panel here. We will be moving on to our next speaker, who is indeed Susanna Karp. And Susanna Karp, who is an independent European climate policy specialist, but who has worked very much with NGOs, so the non-government organizations, and within the European institutions. Indeed, having a very strong background and looking at things like the European ETS system and the climate law. Susanna, welcome and good morning. We'll be very happy to hear from you this morning, and so thank you for joining us. The floor is yours.
Good morning, and thank you very much for having me here today. It's a total pleasure to join you. I have to say that for the past 5 years, I've attended every single edition of the Romanian Energy Days. And indeed, it's a not to miss event in my calendar. And it is quite sad that we still have to see each other through a screen still at the moment. But having said that, I can't think of a better chosen theme really for this year's edition. So congratulations to the organizers. indeed a stable climate for uncertain times is the biggest challenge that the world is faced with, and in particular in Europe, that we're trying to solve through the EU Green Deal. So I think my presentation, well, that's true, as James said, I have worked extensively on the emissions trading system, and I will refer to that. That will be part of my presentation, as well as talking about what a net zero portfolio for 2050 in Romania could, or maybe should look like. But just before I jump into that, I know there's a saying that perhaps before you go full on in any race, let's say, and this is what achieving carbon neutrality by 2050 is, it's a race against time, but it's good to start with a little break. So I'd like to invite you to take just a small pause and reflect on the massive changes that we've actually seen in the past 5 years. And I can say that in terms of following the development of the climate and energy debate in Romania, which I've had to do in all of my previous roles, including my current role as an independent advisor to EU institutions and NGOs, I have seen a massive shift. So I will just use 3 key dates to exemplify how much can be achieved in 5 years, with the hope that in the next nearly 30 years, we can achieve much more. But in 2017, I recall organizing an event in the Romanian Parliament where the topic was that, so we were linking climate policies with the idea that they're actually economic growth policies. And I have to say that at that point in time in Romania, this idea was challenged by nearly every participant to our conference. Now, fast forward to 2021, we've seen in July, just after the launch of the Fit for 55 package, the president of the European Commission has said the EU Green Deal is Europe's growth strategy. So in nearly just 4 years, there is consensus in Europe that this is very much about growth. Another interesting date is, of course, 2019, when Romania came to the helm of the Council of the European Union. And whereas, let's say, before January 2019, the EU had not yet committed to a carbon neutrality goal, or did not have a strategy in place for that, at the end of the Romanian presidency of the EU Council, we actually had a strategy in place. And so in that sense, this goal for the European Union is one that Romania should feel a lot of ownership over, and also a great responsibility towards. And just the final date is February 2020, when the last time I was at an event in Bucharest launching a report. I had written in my previous role at Sandbag, and it was a report co-written with Bankwatch. We actually completed a calculation of all the funds that would be available under certain scenarios for the energy transition in Romania up to 2030. So we looked there at the value of ETS auctioning revenues. And of course, no one believed me at that point that using 35 euros or 28 euros per ton was actually a conservative estimate. But by now, I think we understood that that was perhaps an ambitious estimate, really. But so we were looking at the amount of funds available, only to see that they were actually on par with the sort of what the declared needs had been. But in the meantime, everything has changed. And now the amount we were looking at in February 2020 has more than tripled. So the debate in Romania has also shifted from, do we have is there a sufficient financial resource for the next decade for the energy transition, to, now the new question is, how do we best utilize the available funds to secure investments coming further, developing further and triggering further investments? So how do we make most use of the available funds? So all of this has happened in 5 years. That's quite astonishing. And so while at the moment we struggle with optimism, and rightfully so, the situation is quite dire all around us. But having said that, I think these past 5 years should give us a sense of just what is actually feasible. This was a word that came up in Mr. Bouchoy's presentation, and also James picked up on. Look at what has been feasible in 5 years. I dare to say much more is feasible in the next 10 and beyond. So 2 quick points that I will now make on the role of carbon pricing in the transition is that the pandemic has actually worked as a stress test on the ways in which we can build uncertainty in the most turbulent times. So what we've seen is that the EU ETS has not just been a robust and effective market, but it actually outperformed most markets, and it took the direction of asset markets. So in that sense, we understood that our atmosphere is an asset, that the possibility of constantly dumping CO2 in it is actually a scarce and disappearing possibility if we hope to have a resilient economy. So all of this change in economic thinking, if you recall, in the spring of 2020, really came to the forefront in the Financial Times and everywhere around the world. There was a clear understanding that long-term economic security and stability was very closely linked to climate mitigation policies. And so the EU ETS became one of the best performing carbon markets in the world. And I have worked on the previous revision of it. I dare to say, I think I know why, which is that it actually has inside it a built-in mechanism that helps it deal with uncertainty, which may occur from exogenous shocks. So if anything, instead of us altering the EU ETS, we might as well, I think, alter the other policies to make them shock resilient, following the model of the EU ETS. Now, of course, in the past, there was a concern about carbon leakage, and I have to say that all of the discussions I've taken part in over the past year have really been now about innovation leakage, which is happening rapidly, and the investment leakage that follows with that. So yet another reason to really understand that carbon pricing is not a burden in the European Union, but rather an enabler. And clearly the European Commission, in putting forward a carbon contracts for difference scheme as part of the Innovation Fund, understands that actually by securing contracts for low carbon investments through a stable carbon price, we are increasing the security and certainty around our investment landscape in Europe. So this in Eastern Europe in particular will require a bit of a change of mindset, because so far the idea has been that a low carbon price will help achieve the energy transition. But we're seeing very clearly that in the race against time, in the race for innovation and for investments, what we actually need is systems in place that allow us to secure the required carbon price, that we can actually go ahead and make the ambitious investments in technologies that all of the previous speakers referred to in various ways. Okay, and so I'm done with this point. I will just share with you what I think a net zero portfolio by 2050 looks like, because of course the EU climate law, to which James referred to, and I've worked on it very closely, doesn't actually specify if we're going to reach net zero at EU level or at member state level. Now, if I follow the logic of subsidiarity and proportionality, I will assume it's at member state level. So let's think of this. What would a net zero energy system in 2050 look like for Romania? Now, of course, nobody knows. We will make a lot of guesses, some of those guesses, very well-informed guesses, very well-educated guesses, and perhaps we make some bets on technologies as well. But the way I would approach that question is to say, let's imagine we're building this today. We're starting to build the energy system for 2050 today. So today is our starting point. We could imagine we're starting from scratch or not necessarily, but starting from scratch gives a pretty good indication that personally, I think it would make most sense to start from solar and wind. This is because looking at trends, we've seen constant cost reductions in these technologies and constant advancements in technologies. In fact, the two are linked. But so just if the idea is to actually set up a system that is also a cost-effective transition, or we also save money in the process, I would assume that's the starting point. Now, that changes the question of what else needs to be there in 2050 to balance the system around, let's say, a largely renewable powered energy system. So what I suggest is that whatever else is in the system will also have to be net zero compliant. So if we're looking at fossil fuels in the system, that will very clearly require CCS, which at the moment, as we all know, is not really on the table. The infrastructure is lacking, which makes it, let's say, not a very bankable investment at this point in time. So if the plan is to have that in the mix in 2050, I think what needs to happen there then becomes quite clear, because the mix will be largely carbon neutral. And so now the question on increasing energy prices, it's come up in every single one of the interventions before, and I want to also pick up on it because I haven't necessarily noticed an increase in the price of natural resources, but only an increase in the price of oil and gas. As far as I'm concerned, solar and wind remain largely free and entirely free, really. But water and geothermal are also options which are largely free, and we could explore a bit further. So if anything, with the prices increasing, it makes it quite clear that doubling down on investments in renewables also means doubling the savings that we would be making at this point in time. And this is critical because, as previous speakers have mentioned, electrification of other sectors and of other solutions depends on us really showing some grit for developing the electricity grid further. And we absolutely need to be able to rely on it, including for production of carbon neutral fuels, such as green hydrogen. We also, if we look at the 3 clusters of solutions that we've got available that could inform the future 3 panels in today's conference, which looks super interesting, but I'd say all of those interact with each other around the topic of electricity. So if we look at transport, buildings, and heavy industry, even if heavy industry needs hydrogen, we're really circling around the relationship between electricity and other supporting networks. So I think just to conclude, the debate about uncertainty certainly requires we operate no regret solutions because at this point in time, we know that there could be future shocks. We know that we should be saving, let's say, as much as we can in what we invest in at this point in time. So if we go with the no regret solutions, which we absolutely know will be part of the 2050 mix, we also end up really boosting and creating our 2030 portfolio. This would make the country quite an attractive investment landscape, if also the policy ecosystem supports that. So I've heard there are issues currently in the country, and I think maybe setting up an investment committee at national level with input from private sector and civil society could actually help in overcoming some of those burdens, because we are in a race for time and a race for innovation and investment. And since we're talking about bets, I'll wrap up with a personal bet. And I'm not really competitive, so feel free to copy my idea. No problem there. But I will just say that 2050 is as far from us right now as 1994 was. And I remember 1994 because I started first grade in 1994. This also gives you an idea of sort of those professionals in 2050 and sort of, the children starting school today, kind of what age they will have around 2050. But having said that, I started school in an elementary school in Constanța in Romania, from where I could see the Black Sea from the window of my classroom. I really enjoyed looking at the Black Sea, and the bet I will make is that when I will look out of the window from the same classroom in 2050, I will see something new there. I will see most likely massive offshore wind development on the Black Sea. I will see associated hubs with that, so producing green hydrogen, which at some point that might be free by then. So I can envision a whole system deriving from that. That's just my personal bet that I'm happy to make for the future. And thank you very much once again for inviting me and allowing me to share a couple of reflections with you. Thank you.
That was great, Susanna. Thanks very much for that. And I particularly liked your bet at the end. I won't be betting against you. I'll only say that. I feel that the Black Sea has as much potential as the North Sea, but we can probably get onto that in a minute. I really appreciate the optimism and the great upbeat nature that you've given here. I think it's good to reflect on how much has changed in the last 5 years and how much will change in the next 10 years. I think the speed of change will be quite surprising for many people, but I think those of us that are lucky to work in energy understand what is coming. I also appreciate the point about 35 euros in the EU ETS being considered somehow dangerous back then, and now look at us, we're way over 60. So I think, yes, there's so much that we can learn from what we've seen in the past and where we can go for the future. The other point I liked was the carbon leakage versus innovation leakage. In Eurogas, we work very closely with a group of gas innovators who are doing tremendous things like electrolyzer production, anaerobic digester production. You mentioned CCS, so I will say steam methane reformers as well. these are European technologies, and there is also, of course, the risk that if we don't take the advantage in them, we lose that first mover advantage, and they could indeed somehow slip out of our hands. That's jobs, that's communities that we could lose. So it's a good way of thinking about it, and I've got to be honest, the first time I heard it. So sorry to everybody if you've all heard that before, but I hadn't. So I appreciate that, Susanna. That was very good. Now, the one question that I have, a real question for you, is this point that you made about, what does a net zero future look like? If you look at the European Commission on a sort of EU-wide basis, you're talking about 50% electrification, which means there's 50% of other things. And you're saying, in your vision, it's much more of a system that's built on solar and wind, which is therefore clearly electric. Within the electricity that the European Commission also have, there's plenty of nuclear, which I think will be here and will stay, whether we like it or not. That's just a fact. And so I wonder, how do you see this? Do you see it in the same way as the European Commission? Do you think it's feasible to double, or even more than double, the amount of electricity that we currently use in the next 28 years to get to that 50%? Whilst you're hesitant about CCS, what would the other 50% be? Would you agree with the European Commission and say that it would be renewable and decarbonized molecules plus biomass? Or do you see a different kind of formulation? I don't know, in Romania it might be slightly different, but this is the EU-wide, and that's the model I have. I don't have a 2050 Romanian model in my head. So I have to ask you about the EU-wide one, because I thought it was interesting how you framed your future.
Well, thank you very much, James, for that question. I mean, that is the question, right? And I think there's different ways of operating, sort of modeling when you look towards, you can backcast from your ending point, or you can project forward. So the example I used was very much, I said, let's start today looking at the costs today, presuming we start from zero and we also know where we end up. Now, of course, the Commission hasn't started from the same point, but I do like to think we're looking towards the same goal. Now, of course, even for 2050 net zero, we've seen 8 scenarios at least from the European Commission. So I think really to answer your question, do I think it's possible to double the percentage of electricity by 2050? I think that it's necessary, and so we will have to make it possible. And certainly, I don't. If that's impossible, then I think net zero, as we've envisioned it, is impossible. And I don't think anyone is ready to say that. And if we did, it would probably be a catastrophe for the rest of the world. So Europe has a responsibility of making that happen at home. The interesting thing about Europe is that it's also a bit of a micro laboratory for the wider world, because we do have quite wide economic divergence. We have different economic cultures. And so I think, that is a question of how will we mobilize the resources? What do we prioritize first? And I would guess the 2020s are the decade to massively boost up the electric grid interconnectivity, because from that point on, you enable sectors becoming decarbonizing faster. And one thing I wouldn't want to see, as we've seen in the Fit for 55 package, there's a ban on internal combustion engines in 2035. But so what I wouldn't want to see is that, let's say, the current traditional ICE cars all migrate to Central Eastern Europe, because there's not the electricity infrastructure in place for citizens there to actually buy what will be the most rational economic choice at that point, which is will be an electric car. So by 2035, the electric car will be the go-to option. But without infrastructure for using it, I could imagine that parts of Europe would not necessarily would have to make the difficult choices of getting kind of maximizing the time up to then to take on old technologies. So I really think the next decade is the one where we should seek to achieve that super ambitious goal, certainly up to 2035. We don't have until 2050. So I think everyone will have to be a bit more ambitious, but luckily I notice technologies are moving faster than our legislation. And so I'm confident that we will have a lot of support from the private sector, and we'll see a lot of developments happening quickly.
Yeah, indeed. I think just making a little comment as well, talking about those cars that migrate, they don't just migrate to Eastern Europe or Central and Eastern Europe, they migrate all over the world. I can say that first-hand experience when I lived in Addis Ababa. I drove a car from the Netherlands. Its first life was in the Netherlands. Those cars will migrate beyond the borders of the European Union. It's an absolute fact. There's no two ways about that. So yes, what we do in Europe is important, and I fully agree with you, because we have to set the example. We have to show that it's possible, because the rest of the world maybe won't be able to move as fast as us. We are a big consumption center, so we have to take the responsibility of the fact that we consume way more than we should. And in fact, therefore, I think that's probably fair. I don't think anybody would argue. You see how many worlds that we would need to keep most Europeans going. Anyway, the reality is that we have to take that responsibility, and therefore we do need to make sure that we are moving that. I want to pick up on one thing you said about the infrastructure, because I'm glad you said it, because it kind of anticipated my follow-up question. Now, it's all very well that we need to do what you say that we need to do, but there is going to need to be a massive amount of investment in the infrastructure. And that's something that needs to take place, which probably hasn't taken place at the speed we would have needed in the last 5 or 10 years, shall we say. I mentioned in the question I gave to Andre about, Euroelectric did a very good study and said we need about 400 billion euros to 2030 to upgrade the distribution grid. Actually, in Eurogas, we fully agree. We think that is probably the amount of money that is needed to be invested. Do you see investment being one of the problems, private money being mobilized, public money being mobilized? So that's what we're going to need. And you haven't really touched on it in anything you said. And investment in infrastructure is more difficult in a way than it is, say, to invest in a wind farm or a solar farm, because you can obviously work out how you're going to make your returns. Those things sort of have to be socialized over time. Do you believe that there's enough being done to address the financial constraints that I think we could say we've seen over the last few years, which have slowed down the upgrade of infrastructure? Because I feel that it's often overlooked. If we don't upgrade the infrastructure, it will necessarily slow down the energy transition. It's for me, it's a cause and effect. The infrastructure has to move at the same pace, if not faster, but it's expensive. Have we done enough to unlock finance through taxonomy, through the public financing mechanisms that we're seeing in the Fit for 55, recovery funds and so on and so forth? Do you feel enough is being done?
Absolutely not. And that is partly why I introduced the carbon contracts for difference notion in my presentation, because while that's maybe not the only instrument that is out there, but that reflects a very important principle about sharing the cost for extremely expensive investments such as those that we need in infrastructure. So, we have a carbon contracts for difference in the innovation fund, but I take that also as a hint that that is what's needed in Europe, and we see some member states taking up that scheme to support, let's say, investments in heavy industry. But we could very well see something like that developing, a broader system through which the costs are shared and guaranteed and secured. The investment is secured by member states stepping up. And I think the European Union can do a lot to encourage that, but I also think it needs to be matched. So it's really, the truth is, we're only going to make it in this transition if we can work together and join forces, and we need ambition on all sides. So that's why sometimes I'm quite disappointed to hear that, there is a lack of ambition in member states, specific member states that could actually be extremely ambitious. And in fact, I think all should be, because it's in their interest and because it's in their direct economic interest to be ambitious, to create these support schemes, to rechannel the ETS funds, to actually back up the investments, top them up. So I think there's so much that can be done at member state level. And I do see a very strong and creative and assertive Commission on this front. So I think I would hope in the next 2 years, we can actually set up such a scheme. But yes, without the infrastructure in place, and currently it's lacking, a lot of investments are not bankable as a result. So we won't be able to really accelerate at the pace that we need. You're right, we might even slow down the energy transition. And what I'm most concerned about is that we might chip away from some of the progress we've already made by now putting too much pressure, let's say, on an electric grid that's not expanding quickly enough. So we might actually be deterring, let's say, the energy transition. So yes, I mean, that goes beyond slowing down investments. It literally means investment leakage to places ready to move much quicker than Europe. So I hope I've answered.
Yeah, you've answered my question very well. And I think that's really that was the core that I was going for. That was the kernel. I think you've hit it, because I honestly feel that sometimes in the debate, this is often overlooked. We talk very well about wind and solar and hydrogen and many other things, but actually there's a whole infrastructure that needs to be built underneath it and needs to move at the same time. And that I often feel is the missing link, which is overlooked. But I'm glad that you picked that up, and indeed appreciate the response there, Susanna. I'd like to ask the panelists to come back, all of you. Thank you, Susanna. Thank you for the intervention and the opening comments. I have one question from the audience, and I must remind the audience, if you want to have a question and not just let me do the questioning for the next 14 minutes, it would be great if we could hear from you. I have a question for you, Giles, from the audience. I'm going to read it out, actually, because it's quite long, and I'm going to read it slowly so you can get it. The potential cap on the price of electricity is temporary. This refers to Romania, until spring. Then the prices will be free again. in this context of the high prices for electricity, do you consider that there is still a need for any support mechanism of any kind for renewables? On the other hand, what do you think would be a price in terms of euro a megawatt hour for the wholesale market that would not require any support or intervention anymore? So the first question I think is more straightforward, really. Do we need to still have support and mechanisms for renewables? And they're used in the context of the high prices, but I think it can be more general. And secondly, is there a specific price where you think that the wholesale market gets to where you don't need to see any interventional support for renewables anymore? Giles, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much indeed, James, and thank you to the question, a very good question. We do not need subsidies in the old-fashioned term of the word anymore. What we need now are revenue stabilization mechanisms. And as I said earlier, contracts for difference are the best form of revenue stabilization mechanism. The way it works is as follows. Government runs an auction. It's a reverse auction. The wind farm or solar park developers bid in saying, we can generate electricity if you guarantee us for the next 15 years X lei or X euros per megawatt hour revenue. Let's assume that your bidding price is 40 euros a megawatt hour and you are the lowest price. You win the auction, you build your wind farm. And you know that for the first 15 years, you're always going to get 40 euros a megawatt hour. Now, if the wholesale market price is 30, you earn your 30 off the market and the government pays you an additional 10. If the wholesale market price is 50, you take the 50 initially, but then you pay 10 back to the government. This is a two-sided contract for difference. So the government is paying out some of the time and it's being paid back some of the time as well. It's not a subsidy, it's working both ways. It's a revenue stabilization mechanism. It has two advantages. First, it's cheap for governments. So let me give you an example. The UK is about to run an auction for 9 gigawatts of offshore wind in December this year. And it will be under this two-sided contract for difference model. So they know that whatever industry bids in and whatever industry wins, they're going to be paying out some of the time. They're going to be getting paid back a lot of the time. How much money has the UK government set aside in order to cover their potential outlay over 15 years for 9 gigawatts of offshore wind? Answer, £200 million only. That is tiny amount of money to pay for 9 gigawatts of new offshore wind capacity. The second advantage of these two-sided contracts for difference is that they reduce the financing costs. Now, this might sound like a bit of an arcane, detailed point, but the reality is that renewables are capex heavy. You pay a lot of money up front to build your wind farm or solar park before you're earning any revenue. So it's very important to minimize how much you're paying for that upfront finance, whether it's debt or equity. If you have a two-sided contract for difference, you've won your auction, you can go to the banks and they look at your project and they say, we like what we see because we know you will be earning always 40 euros a megawatt hour over the next 15 years. So we will lend you lots of money at low rates of interest. If you don't have that security and you go to the bank saying, well, I want to build a wind farm, but I don't know how much I'm going to be earning. It'll be whatever the market price is. Bank will say, well, that's not very good for us. We don't know if you're going to be able to pay us back month by month. So we'll only lend you a little bit of debt and you're going to have to finance your project largely out of equity, which is much more expensive to raise and finance than is debt. And if they do lend you any debt, it will be at much higher rates of interest. Now, the net result of all of this is that a wind farm that has a two-sided contract for difference can expect to have lifetime cost of electricity over its whole period of operation for an offshore wind farm today of, let us say, 50 euros a megawatt hour. It's a hypothetical number, but exactly the same wind farm that does not have this stable revenue perspective and is reliant only on market revenue, their lifetime cost of electricity, because of the higher financing costs, will be 92 euros a megawatt hour. So the huge increase in financing costs almost doubles the total lifetime costs of the wind farm.
Thank you for that, Giles. It was a good response. I think it was a good question as well. Thanks to the audience. Is there anyone else from the panel who would like to comment on the question and comment on maybe what Giles said? I think everyone's satisfied, Giles. I think you've answered the question very well. And I'm very, very happy also to hear about this idea in the UK that they will have this 9 gigawatt. They will use this two-sided contract for difference, because this is what it's really about. It is about that stability. And that really is what is needed. And I think that will make a big difference to actually live into what Susanna's been talking about to speed things up in the next 10 years. I do have another question which relates perhaps more to Roxana, and that is about hydrogen. And you mentioned the need, and we talked about costs coming down, and Giles just talked about how costs can be reduced for wind. Hydrogen is, of course, being seen as a big part of the energy transition, as a necessary new energy, more or less. I mean, it's been around for a long time, but a clean version of hydrogen, new clean hydrogen will be used to help us reach climate neutrality. How are we going to get those costs down in relation to that? Because you mentioned it. So the question is, how are we going to get those costs down? What kind of policy levers are you looking at? And do you see blending as a mechanism to help get that cost down, Roxana?
That's right. And thank you very much. Actually, this is a very good question that has to do a little bit also with the question that you addressed to Susanna. And I was very much interested to intervene there. So retrofitting is the key. We have already a very wide available infrastructure today. It consists of almost 2 million kilometers. So the existing natural gas pipelines for hydrogen need little modification to be fit for 100% hydrogen transport, as the pipeline materials are generally very fit for hydrogen transport as well. Retrofitting, we think, is up to 90% cheaper than building new dedicated hydrogen pipelines. So here you already see a cost benefit that our gas infrastructure is building. For example, in Germany, there is a plan to convert and build a 5,900 kilometers hydrogen transmission grid, because let's not forget, this is actually bringing the cost for consumers down. And I'm referring here to, for example, the situation that Germany faced in 2018, that close to 1 billion of euros of renewable on and offshore wind in electricity in Germany was lost because of capacity constraints in the electricity grid. So that would have never happened if that energy was converted into hydrogen. So we need to make sure that all infrastructure is used for the cost benefit of the consumer. Now, you also mentioned blending. This is one of the other ways to transport hydrogen via the gas infrastructure. And it is, in fact, a super tool to decarbonize the energy system when hydrogen volumes are small, especially during 2020s. So right now, it is seen as an intermediate step, because when hydrogen volumes increase, dedicated hydrogen pipelines will emerge. They will initially connect industrial clusters, and they will later connect regional and national hydrogen infrastructure. And the good thing about it is that consumers of hydrogen admixtures are the same consumers connected today to networks compatible with natural gas, such as industries and users of domestic gas heating. So we've talked about 2 different ways of transporting hydrogen. Firstly, I mentioned retrofitting is the key. We can already use that today, little modification for hydrogen transport. Blending, the second one. But the third way is via dedicated hydrogen pipelines. They do not differ significantly from natural gas pipelines. For example, in the Netherlands, there is already an operational natural gas of 12 kilometers converted into a hydrogen pipeline, and it is operational since 2018. In fact, it connects hydrogen production sites, among other from offshore wind at the North Sea, to hydrogen storage in salt caverns, and to demand in industrial clusters. And actually, speaking about the North Sea, the Black Sea has the same potential for Romania and for Bulgaria, because we can benefit a lot from the offshore wind potential there. There is a technical capacity of around 450 gigawatts, so the World Bank says. So for sure, it steers a very, very new interest. And I'm sure that the wider the volumes of hydrogen, the lower the costs. But for sure, we need to make sure that the electricity grid and the gas infrastructures work together in order to make sure we are both benefiting from each other. Thank you very much.
I think, yeah, thank you, Roxana. I think you're very much the sector integration, which is a word we couldn't keep out of our mouths last year, which I feel somehow is not spoken about so much this year. But in any case, yeah, I see the point you're making. There's one final follow-up, and then just very quickly, the policy levers, looking at GIE, the policy levers to actually increase those volumes, you're also calling for targets.
That's right. That's
gases and targets for the decarbonization of gas, I believe.
That's right, and targets are important.
Roxana. Okay, I think we might have lost. Okay, I believe we are coming to the end of the session in any case. I think that what I would like to... Roxana, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Yeah, you can hear me. Did you hear my last question?
I think it was about targets.
Yes, thank you. Everything's frozen on my screen. Maybe it was my internet. Anyway.
I'm sorry. It's not that cold in Brussels.
No, it's not. But...
I have a warm heart, so that should not be a problem either.
Indeed. No, it's fine. I think because we've lost a little bit of time. What I would like to do then is ask all of the panelists. I know Susanna has to run. So Susanna, I'll start with you. It's a yes or no question. Can the Black Sea become the new North Sea in terms of wind and hydrogen production?
Yes.
Great. Roxana?
Totally, yes.
Well, I had to say that with you two, of course. You're looking out over, looking over from Costanza. Giles? I believe that's a yes. Yes, thank you, Giles. And Andre?
This is a clear answer.
Indeed. Thank you, Giles. Thank you. Andre?
Yes, it has a potential.
Yeah, very, very, very good. I think that we are all perfectly aligned on that. And as we are literally at the end of this very interesting session, I must say, Christian Zinglerson was supposed to join us from ASA and unfortunately couldn't connect this morning. But in any case, I hope you all enjoyed the discussion on decarbonizing energy. I think we've got some really, well, I think it was very comprehensive. We've got some very decent insight. And I think we found a lot of new avenues that we can explore to help the energy transition. So I'd like to thank Giles. I'd like to thank Andre, and of course, Susanna and Roxana for making this panel absolutely, truly insightful and very much enjoyable, I hope, as much for me as it was for the audience. Mihai, thanks very much again for the invitation. It's been a great pleasure to moderate this wonderful panel. And if we were in, I would give a round of applause, but it's a bit weird in my own house, in my own study, it sort of echoes. Well done, thank you so much. Mihai, over to you.
Thank you, James. Great panel, great moderation. We are getting ready now to see what the buildings panel is gonna tell us about the topic of the event. While we get the panel ready, we have a 3-minute videos, and then we are coming back with the moderators and the panel of decarbonizing buildings panel. Thank you.